So I've worked with you on pre-assessments with some OSCs, and I want to hear what your opinion is. Some of them have a guy who has other job responsibilities, and they've asked him to, or her, to go through and come up with a SPUR score. So generally look at the 110 controls and check a box if it's implemented or not, and then score themselves and post it up to SPURs. From your experience in dealing with the OSCs, how good is that as an indicator that they can be CMMC compliant?
So assuming that that person that is responsible for implementation and assessment of 800-171 at the OSC, if they have the appropriate credentials like a CISA, Certified Information Systems Auditor certification, so they understand the framework and can properly assess it. If you've got a relatively high score for SPURs, you'd be pretty safe in assuming that you're almost there. Unfortunately, most organizations who go through the self-assessment and report to SPURs, they'll give themselves a high positive score. And we find that there's a pretty significant difference in what their self-assessment score is and when the assessors come in and actually assess them, what the actual score is from an assessment team. So there's a big delta between what's actual and
Let's get into that for a second, because my experience is they're looking at the controls as written, download the NIST document, create a spreadsheet, check off some things, maybe download a spreadsheet or use their GRC portal. But what they're really lacking, what we're finding, are gaps in the objectives. And that's what is affecting their actual overall SPUR score, the reality in SPUR score. And are you seeing the same thing? Is it the objectives that they're not paying attention to? Is it failure or not the scope of their environment? What's going on?
So it's a combination. For those that don't know what control objectives are, NIST has their list of controls, and each control, as if that wasn't enough, NIST decided to be friendly and add more controls that are considered practices or control objectives underneath each control. So one control could have 5 separate pieces to it. So there's breakdowns in, one, evaluating yourself against those objectives, and 2, making mention it again, the scope is incorrect. So a big piece of an assessment is making sure you've got the scope correct for your environment. Where is CUI? What systems is it stored on? Who has access to it? And a big issue that we see when we're going in and evaluating how these OSCs are evaluating themselves is they're not applying those control objectives to each individual system or all of the individual users that have access to the CUI. So you're severely hindering yourself because you're not getting an assessment of the full scope, every control that requires it.
So, a generic question, do you have MFA? Yes, we have MFA on M365. But the system, the ERP system where CUI is being maintained, the file shares that are local, none of that require MFA in the organization, so they really don't have it, but they're checking the box saying that they do. Mm-hmm. So you're saying it's got to be specific to the scoped environment, and then we got to look at all the objectives inside it. So it's much more than just checking a box as going through 171 and then posting a 110.
Yes.